evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Ben Dawson. I'm the Survey Director with Crop Consultants Australia. I'm also an agronomist with B&W Rural in Collarenebri, northern New South Wales. So welcome to the 5th Crop Consultant Australia webinar in the series, Managing Hard to Control Weeds. These webinars are being offered as member-only events in light of the cancellation of the Crop Consultant Seminar due to COVID-19. Firstly, I'd like to thank and acknowledge our corporate partners, Adama, Ag Biotech, Agnova, BASF, Bayer, Corteva, FMC, Syngenta, UPL, VicChem for helping make these webinars possible. I guess most of us are probably fairly familiar with Zoom and video chats now, but I'll just run over just the general housekeeping quickly. If you'd like, you can raise your hand at any time. You can use the chat function to contact the speakers or the host, put questions up at any time, and use the vote up function to prioritise questions that are important. And we're certainly encouraging chat as part of the question process too. Attendees may have something to add, a question or something like that. So yeah, please be welcome. And finally, just a reminder that the webinar is being recorded and that the recording will be made available to members on a closed page of the website. Okay, so I think we'll get into it. We've got a fair bit to cover. So we've got two great speakers tonight. The first is Dr. Chris Preston. Chris is a Professor of Weed Management at the University of Adelaide. He works on understanding and management of hard to control weeds. Current research projects include integrated weed management in southern farming systems to combat herbicide resistance, improve herbicide efficacy and longevity in southern no-till farming systems, mechanisms and evolution and inheritance of resistance. And Chris also chairs the Glyphosate Sustainability Working Group. Would you please welcome Chris? Cheers.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, can you see my screen now, Ben?
Yes, Paul. Yep.
Okay, good. So what I really want to just have a fairly short talk about some of the issues to think about in trying to tackle some of these hard to control weeds. And usually when we start thinking about how we're going to put together a weed management program for some hard to control weeds, is that we'll be thinking not only about, you know, what herbicides might be able to kill them, but we're also worried about when they germinate, when they're going to emerge, how soon until they set seed, and what are the opportunities that we have throughout the year to try and get on top of some of these weeds. So I'm going to talk principally about 3 different weeds, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on some of the things we know about their biology that we might, forget from time to time about how it works. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the practices that we know work, and perhaps some of the practices we know don't work. So with that, I'm going to start with Feathertop Rhodes grass. It's, you'll all probably be familiar with Feathertop Rhodes grass, and probably in fact, of all the weeds I'm going to talk about, the key thing we need to remember is that they're small seeded and surface germinating weeds. So they tend to come up from the surface of the soil. And this actually has some implications for how we think about them. One of which is that they're going to all be quite well suited to no-till farming systems. So in those sort of broadacre no-till farming systems, these are the weed species that are going to be problematic. But it also is about getting them to germinate in the first place. So just because they're sitting on the surface doesn't mean that they're always going to germinate. They actually have to be wet enough, the soil needs to be wet enough for long enough for them to come up. So when we think about Feathertop Rhodes grass, principally it's going to germinate in spring and through summer where sufficient moisture occurs. So where sufficient rainfall events occur that are big enough, it's going to bring it up. And it'll even germinate into autumn, as we've seen this year, if you get very large rainfall events, particularly if you actually have had a long drought, so that all the dormancy is lost in those seeds. So we saw quite a bit of Feathertop Rhodes grass come up quite late this year, but that was about the size of the rainfall events we were getting. So size of rainfall events matters, and for these sorts of weeds, we're generally thinking that you need the surface of the soil moist for 2 to 3 days for them to actually germinate and get their roots down, which means that when we're thinking about a paddock scale, they're much more likely perhaps to come up in some more protected areas than perhaps in the less protected areas. And Feathertop Rhodes grass really can't emerge from depth, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. And I think the other thing to remember about Feathertop Rhodes grass, and this photograph reminds me of it, is that these are pretty little seeds and they do blow on the wind. Generally speaking, they don't go very far. I mean, we've measured them in under normal circumstances going sort of 40 metres or so, but we actually have had some quite unusual conditions in the last couple of years. It's been fairly extensive drought, so all that ground cover's been lost. And what this has meant is that these seeds can actually blow further. And so there's been a lot of, I know a lot of conversation about people who didn't previously see Feathertop Rhodes grass now seeing it. Yes, one of the reasons is that it's blowing in from outside. So some things about the biology, and I've got just a couple of graphs here to just help you get your head around it. So the first one's looking at seedling emergence from burial depth, and you put them on the surface and 75% of the seeds will emerge. You're still getting good emergence down to about 2 centimetres, and it's not till you're getting down to about 5 centimetres that it starts to fall away. So whilst we think about Feathertop Rhodes grass as being a surface germinator, it can actually germinate from some depth. So shallow burial is not going to stop this coming up. So if you're wanting to use tillage to try and control it, you really need to get that seed to quite a depth to stop it from coming up. Probably your best use of tillage for trying to manage Feathertop Rhodes grass is probably not about burying the seeds. It's probably more about just trying to get through that material that you've got if you've had a really big infestation. It's very hard to get sprays into the centre of those infestations, and taking them out might be a way of resetting the clock. What you are going to do is you're going to get more germination, so you've got to come back and almost do a double knock. So tillage, come back, control the survivors. One of the things that I think that many people really aren't terribly aware about Feathertop Rhodes grass is how easily it can germinate at low temperatures. So this is looking at the time to getting 50% of the seed germinated. So it's the inverse of that. The bigger the number, the more that's germinating. But you'll see that you're getting even considerable germination down to 10 degrees. So in most years, we're actually going to start seeing Feathertop Rhodes grass germinating probably from next month on, once the soil temperatures start getting up. If you've got enough moisture. One of the things that we've noticed about it in some of the work we've tried to do on managing Feathertop Rhodes grass is that, in fact, like all the weeds I'm going to talk about today, when it's coming up in crops, it doesn't really establish very well and persist in very competitive crops. So it's more those less competitive crops, crops that are grown on wider rows, for example, or if you're in the pulses, where you probably see it coming out of those paddocks more than the really good competitive cereal paddocks. So competition's a tool that you can use to try and delay the emergence of Feathertop Rhodes grass until after harvest. The other, I think, aspect of Feathertop Rhodes grass is sort of coming to what do we actually do to control it within the herbicide space? And we actually don't have a lot of tools, is probably the best way to describe dealing with Feathertop Rhodes grass. So we know that it's got natural tolerance to glyphosate, so you've got to use fairly big rates of glyphosate in the first place. But we also know that use of glyphosate right around the farm, across other sectors, roadsides, channel banks, fence lines, all those sort of places where glyphosate is being used. It's actually selecting for glyphosate resistance in Feathertop Rhodes grass, and certainly we've established in some of our work that there's a lot of glyphosate resistant Feathertop Rhodes grass on roadsides. And what that does is it really just takes glyphosate out as being a potential tool. So instead of needing 2 litres to kill it, we now need 10, and that's not a practical option. So, you know, you're going to be thinking of your double knock strategies. One of the things to remember about both this and windmill grass when you're doing fallow double knocks and using those group A herbicides is that they actually have some residual activity, and you've really got to watch out. It probably came to the fore this year with guys trying to get rid of that Feathertop Rhodes grass before sowing wheat. But you've got to be well in front of putting the crop out. So depending on the product you're using, it might be as much as 16 weeks. So, you know, do read the label, check that. You're thinking of putting that group A in as part of the double knock. You want to be putting that in the early summer period rather than doing it really late and then trying to put a cereal crop in. It's still, you know, glyphosate with the group A followed by paraquat is still one of our best options. We can certainly get it with some other herbicide tools. I mean, I know that there's been a lot of balance and paraquat options used on it. But in terms of, you know, trying to understand, well, what else have we got? Well, it's not a whole lot. Part of the trouble with trying to use pre-emergent chemistry against Feathertop Rhodes grass, and some of the chemistry does work, so we can use it in front of summer crops. But if it's germinating back in August, that makes it really hard to put that chemistry out to try and stop it. We did some work, and I just want to show you for a couple of populations of Feathertop Rhodes grass, where what we did was we sprayed herbicides in April and then looked at emergence in the springtime. So we're looking at using these, say, in front of a winter cereal and asking the question, do we actually have any activity at the back end of the season? And the general answer was, well, no, you don't. So for Sakura, trifluralin, Box of Gold, those sorts of products that we might put in front of wheat, we're looking at the percentage emergence we're getting there. It's in the high 70s for the first population CV4 and in the high 60s, low 70s for CV5. And it's not too different from not doing anything. Plant biomass was down a little bit with Sakura and trifluralin, showing that there was still some product there, just wasn't enough to stop it coming up. But pendimethalin actually did work. So, you know, if you've got a cropping rotation where pendimethalin can suit it, that might be something that you can help by putting that prior to sowing the winter crop and actually pushing back the emergence of Feathertop Rhodes grass until later into the summer. So we're not going to get a lot out of our cereal pre-emergent herbicides, our winter cereal pre-emergent herbicides in terms of controlling emergence of this weed. So really what we've got to be thinking about is how do we control it after harvest? What are the options that we have for doing that? And I think really being on top of it. So going out and scouting crops in the springtime to see whether it's actually emerged, particularly focusing on those poorly competitive crops, because that's where the biggest problems are going to arise. All right, moving on to the next to the weeds. This will be another weed you're really familiar with, Fleabane. I think the issues are somewhat the same. It's a small-seeded surface germinating weed. Again, germination's mainly going to be in spring through early summer. Yes, if we get enough rainfall and the soil stays moist enough for long periods in late summer or even into autumn, you can get more Fleabane coming up. But most of it's going to be in that spring, early summer period when the soil can be moist for that 3-day period that you need it to come up and establish. So we don't tend to see a lot of emergence in the wintertime. If it does come up in autumn, the first thing Fleabane does is it puts down this massive great root system. You might have nothing on the surface, but you'll have this big root system underneath, and it'll just sit there all winter. And as soon as it starts to warm up in spring, away it'll go. It'll start powering away. And those Fleabane are probably the hardest to control of it all. So those autumn germinated ones are the ones that you're going to find the most difficulty with. Managing Fleabane, again, you know, we know crop competition will push out its ability to establish. So under competitive cereal crops, you won't get a lot of establishment. Under those less competitive crops, you will. And that'll just sort of push it out until those summer rainfall events, and you'll have to deal with it later, but at least most of it will be smaller then. Again, probably our best herbicide strategies are double knock strategies. Again, with Fleabane, hard to control with glyphosate alone. We've also got a lot of glyphosate resistance in Fleabane. It's being selected not only in paddocks, but also on fence lines, irrigation channels, roadsides, all those other places, and it moves around. So we really need to make sure that we get some really good double knock options working. And I'm just going to show you some data looking at what happens around double knocks. And this was on a population that wasn't actually resistant, but the same rules I think apply even if you got resistant. So what we did was used a range of different glyphosate doses, and then came back with that paraquat dose afterwards. And so the glyphosate alone are the circles there. And you see that once we're getting up to 3 and 4 litres of glyphosate, so getting really good control with the glyphosate alone, then the double knock is giving us very effective control. But if we just go down with a low rate, like a litre of glyphosate, there's just not enough in that paraquat to get it. So when you're putting those mixtures together, you've got to make sure that what's going in with that glyphosate is going to be effective enough. And the other figure I've got here has got the amount of control that was done with that first knock versus the amount of control that was done with the double knock. And those ones that are circled up the top there, they were all 60% or more control with that first knock. So if your first herbicide combination is not good enough to get more than 60% control, your chances of getting really high levels of control with your double knock are much lower. So if we've got glyphosate resistance, it's always going to be about that partner herbicide now, making sure that you've got a robust rate of that partner herbicide out there so that you can get that initial knock to provide you with enough control that the paraquat will tip everything else over the edge. So it's about timing, making sure you've got the right products there. This actually had a whole range of different glyphosate mixtures that we used. We had glyphosate with 2,4-D, glyphosate with Starane, with other products. So, there's lots of options there, but it's making sure that that first mix does the job. And as I said, if we're not getting a lot out of our glyphosate, we've actually got to make sure that that second herbicide is really doing the job for us. Lastly, talk about a bit about common Sowthistle.
Sorry, Chris.
Yes, Ben.
So which Fleabane type was that?
Oh, that was just the flaxleaf Fleabane, so Bonariensis. I know we've got the tall Fleabane as well. One of the things about the tall Fleabane is that we mostly see that in higher rainfall areas. So, more up against the ranges than perhaps sitting out on the plains. So certainly in southern New South Wales, you'll see it along the Murrumbidgee, but once you get out to the cropping country, you really don't see it all unless you get up against the ranges. And I think the same will be, you'll have a fairly similar distribution pattern in the north as well. So in those high areas where rainfall is more consistent, that's probably where you're going to find that tall Fleabane. I don't think the control tactics are really all that different, other than the tall Fleabane's got glyphosate resistance as well. So all the rules I've talked about for flaxleaf Fleabane are going to be the same. So making sure that first knock's robust. Thanks. Okay, so the last of the weeds that I was just going to mention is common Sowthistle. And common Sowthistle, again, small seeded, surface germinating. This weed is a bit different. If there's moisture available, this will actually germinate all year round. And so for the others, we're going to be focusing mostly on looking at what's going to be present when harvest of winter crops is happening, and then what will happen if we get big summer rainfall events. Sowthistle we're going to have to be thinking about the whole time. It's wind dispersed, and whereas the other two weeds, we're really only worried about glyphosate resistance. This one's got resistance to the Group B herbicides as well, and I know that there's a fair bit of flame gets used as in fallow management. We've actually got populations that are resistant to that. It's resistant to glyphosate, and it's resistant to the Group I herbicides. Now, I don't have a population yet that's got all those three, but it is only a matter of time. And so this is really going to start complicating our fallow management. And so we've really got to, I think, try and think of some tactics that are really going to work against a weed that is presenting a problem like this. One of the things about seed dispersal means that these populations are really complex, and this is some work we've been doing actually in lentils in South Australia, but you know, the principle's the same. So what we did, this is a single farmer's field, and we collected individuals and looked at which mutation they had in this case in the gene that gives resistance to the Group B herbicide, so to Fleabane. And all the ones with colour have one or more mutations in that gene, and the ones with two different colours have got two mutations, and they're the ones that actually turn out to be resistant to the IMI herbicides like Fleabane. What this is telling us is that even in this one field, we've got a whole swag of different mutations happening. And this is because this weed's been selected in this field, it's been selected in the neighbouring field, it's blowing in and out of those fields, it's blowing on the roadsides, it's blowing back into fields. And so this is going to be a situation where testing for resistance is only going to help you so far. It's going to give you a snapshot of what you have now, but won't necessarily tell you anything about what you might have next year. So even if we were to completely control Sowthistle for a year in this field, when we came back next year, we'd find that we'd have more Sowthistle in there, and it's not necessarily coming from the seed bank. It's actually blowing in from outside. So populations are complex with multiple types of resistance. It's possible to have more than one type of resistance in a single field. When we start looking at the Group I herbicides and resistance in those, one of the things about this weed is we've lost everything. We've lost all of our Group I herbicides on this. So this is one of the things we really have to be thinking about if we're going to start employing double knock options against this weed. We really need to make sure that, first of all, we don't have resistance to the Group I in the population we're tackling. And secondly, that we absolutely put that second herbicide out there. If we don't, we're going to end up with glyphosate and Group I resistance turning up. And once we've got that, then the double knock's not going to work for us anymore. We'll have to try some different double knocks. So thinking again about, you know, some of the same things that I talked about the other weeds. This is some emergence data for Sowthistle. Important things are that it'll emerge over a wide range of temperatures, and that's why it comes up all year round. It just needs enough moisture. There's always enough temperature out there. It just needs enough moisture. However, it does like to germinate from the surface. So once you get below 2 centimetres, it won't come up. So again, if you're thinking of tillage as being an opportunity for this, you're probably going to have to bury it. But remember that what's going to happen is you're going to get more seed blow in from outside the field. So any practice that does that is really only going to last for a year or so, and then you'll have Sowthistle back again. So I think that probably better options for us are to think about some of the other things we can do in our system. Again, just like the other two weeds, good competitive cereal crops, you don't see a lot of Sowthistle in them. Those less competitive crops, particularly pulses, that's where we have problem with Sowthistle. Another thing to remember about Sowthistle is the glyphosate plus 2,4-D mix is actually antagonistic. So if you're chasing a mixed population of Fleabane and Sowthistle, you're probably better off switching that 2,4-D out for one of your other Group I's, something like Star Rain perhaps. to do it there, because that mixture itself is a little antagonistic. The good thing about the double knock, though, is that Sowthistle, because it's that soft, fleshy type of plant, paraquat can be really effective on it. And certainly one of the practices that we're using in the south to control these weeds is paraquat plus sharpen. And that does a very good job of burning those weeds down and desiccating all the tissue. So, we do have perhaps some other and different tools, but again, I think that we really need to be focused around that whole farming system for Sowthistle. And when we've got the ability to grow a good competitive winter crop, we need to be taking that as part of our rotation. So that's where I was going to leave talking about these weeds, Ben. I'm happy to take a couple of questions if there are a couple there.
Yeah, we did. We had a couple on picloram to start with. Paul McIntosh was asking, what about residual picloram resistance to Sowthistle?
The Sowthistle is resistant to picloram as well. We've lost all the group I's. What we don't, I'll just backtrack on that a little bit, but what we have in that is we don't have really, really high rates of resistance or levels of resistance. So certainly some of that residual chemistry and residual picloram will be good at actually stopping those early germinating Sowthistle, and it won't be till it starts to actually decay that the resistant Sowthistle will be able to come up. So you'll get that first bit, but when it starts to decay, they'll be able to go through it.
Yeah. Second one on picloram as well. Are we seeing any activity on Feathertop rosegrass from picloram applied in crop?
It's not something I've done. Maybe Paul might know the answer to that one.
Okay. And we had another one. Wondering if there's if Innovix has any residual activity on the porous species, like Feathertop Rhodes and windmill grass.
Look, it's got a little bit, and we actually did have a similar trial to the one I showed where we put Innovix out, and it did reduce emergence a little bit, but it wasn't spectacular. If you're putting it out as, say, an early application in crop and then hoping that it's still going to be enough there when you come round to that spring period, it's one of the issues with while we're using Innovix is because it's got a shorter residual, and so we've lost some of that residual by then.
Yeah. Okay. That's might be all we have for the moment, Chris, but okay. Yeah, certainly we could have more questions after Paul's presentation. So thank you. Right up. Well, we'll move on to our second speaker, Paul McIntosh. Paul's been a field agronomist for the past 41 years. He was Pulse Australia Queensland chair for 5 years. He was the GRDC Regional Advisory Committee for 9 years, including 3 years as chair of the Western Downs. He's Australian Mungbean Association Life member. This year he was the recipient of the GRDC Seed of Light Award for the Northern Region, and is currently the Northern Region Extension Agronomist for the Australian Herbicide Resistance Initiative and Pulse Australia. Take it away, Paul.
Good, thanks, Ben. Evening, Chris. How are you going? You're muted, Chris.
I'm muted. I'm well, thanks, Paul. I'll mute myself again.
Lisa, are we right to start? Everybody, thanks very much to the CCA board for asking us to talk tonight about where we are with herbicide resistance in the Northern region. And I thought I'd do it a little bit different. I knew Chris was going to come up with all the good graphs and the reasons why. And I thought I'd put actual people on the screen and have them talk about what they're doing on their farms as farmers or as their agronomists, their recommendations, or what they're doing to control or get over the top of the herbicide resistance that we're all facing with a variety of plants in our farming system. So here's the first one up, Lisa, is Peter Bache. Now, Peter Bache is a long-time farming family here on the Darling Downs. He's on the flat soil country out around Bonjean, so it's pretty handy stuff. And he's had a problem with, well, quite a few weeds, and I think Peter will mention the thing. So he's gone along with chaff tramlining, the EMA chaff tramlining decks he's done. And so, Liesl, could we please start the video with myself and Peter Bache? Paul McIntosh from WeedSmart here, and I'm with Peter Bache, a farmer on the at Pittsworth on the Darling Downs. We're here with Peter today to look at one of the harvest weed seed techniques that we talk about all the time in Australia. And of course, Peter here has adopted the EMA chaff tramlining kit on the back of his header. Can you tell me why you went to a harvest weed seed control like chaff tramlining?
It started just we bought some farms that had bad Johnson grass. And you could always see where the chopper and the sieves were spreading. So we adopted it to try and get our Johnson grass under control, and then we're trying to crop really hard as well. So for volunteer, try and get it all under control. And it was a good idea when I seen it in West Australia, so we took it on.
For those who don't know what Johnson grass is a perennial growing sorghum plant that really infests a lot of our paddocks around the northern region of Australia and in waterways and stuff, and it's a real curse. And of course the thing about it is if you get it in a sorghum or a maize crop, it's very hard to control it with overhead sprays. So Peter's adopted the principle of harvest weed seed control of chaff tramlining to do it. Peter, what other weeds have you been targeting with the chaff tramlining kit?
The other one's Feathertop Rhodes grass is probably the real problem that we're trying to work on. We haven't seen a lot of results up to date, but the last 6 months I think we're starting to see signs of it happening, so that's a good thing.
You showed me that photo that you took that one morning of Feathertop Rhodes with the chaff tram. I know you were happy about that, and I was particularly happy because Feathertop Rhodes has really raised its profile even yet again in the last 12 months to be a real problem on a lot of country in Australia, and it's good to see that chaff tramlining will put it into a row where you can do something about it.
Yep.
Peter, what else have you been noticing about the chaff tramlining? What other weeds have you been picking up, do you think?
Well, obviously Fleabane's another one, and then, but anything that'll, go off the back of your sieves, it'll end up in your wheel track. So, it'll grab some black oats and a few things along those lines as well, I'm pretty sure. And, we don't have big numbers of that, but we still do have the odd plant here and there. So we're all hoping it all adds up.
Yeah.
Milk thistle's another one that it's going to get worse and worse for us. So, I think it all adds up and helps, and I think we're getting cleaner because of it, yeah.
Peter, you've been a great advocate of the chaff tramlining kit, and you've spoken to many WeedSmart and many other days about very strongly about it too. And is there anything other benefits you're finding from the chaff tramlining kit for the future?
Probably dust reduction is probably a big one, especially not that we have too many fires with what we're doing, but if you do have a machine that is a bit prone to fires, maybe that's a good one. But we haven't had really too many dramas. It's just been just good benefits. But we know exactly where our problem is going to be, though. That's probably the key to it all. We just know exactly where it's going to be.
Some other folk that have got a chaff tramlining kit, they say that the pin trash or the trash that goes into the tram tracks actually reduces the dust for the next spray operation.
Yeah.
Have you noticed some of that?
Well, our country's not really dusty, but a couple of guys I have talked to down south in dustier country, especially that red stuff, they definitely, I've heard that a few times, and we haven't seen the results. Probably one thing, since our country's quite flat, the water can run down our wheel tracks a little bit during a big storm. I reckon it does. You sort of see the chaff dams up the water a bit. You can see it after a rain event or a big rain event. So maybe that's helping our water sort of slow down a little bit in our wheel tracks and soak in a bit. So no, we can't see a problem at this point.
Here on the Darling Downs, we have a lot of country that's overland flow, so we try and spread and slow the water to try and reduce those erosion things. And what Peter's talking about can be a real issue with those running down tram tracks and stuff on hilly country, but even in this flat country can give us some real problems. So it's another benefit of using different types of weed control techniques. Peter, have you done anything with row spacing or crop competition at all?
Not a lot. We were on 15-inch with our winter crop and that, but we need to go back to 10. That's one of our plans, but no, we're just trying to really increase our stubble loads as much as we can with the shell-borne stripper, and trying to keep stubble as tall and as good as possible. That was my next thing about the shell-borne stripper. Yep. Your main advantages from that have been very, very excellent as well. Yeah, even during this dry time, it's been paying off. Probably the last 12 months, it's not sort of helping now because it's been that long since we used it, but for the first good 12, 18 months after we last used it, it's been a great thing. So sieves are up in there, and half of it comes down onto the deck, which obviously is spinning, pushing it back here, and then it lands in the wheel tracks back here. This is all covered over, and the dust and the wind just blows out the top here.
Very simple. Is there any a reduction in power for your header at all using this at all?
No difference than running a chaff spinner that spreads it, or chaff spreader. No different. And you've got the chaff tramlining kit on both wheel tracks. Yep.
Do you see any advantage on one wheel track or using both wheel tracks for the future?
No, I don't think it matters too much as long as it's in your wheel tracks, but we went half-half. I'm happy with that. So for what we're doing. Yeah.
Farmer on the Darling Downs, Peter Bache, has been an innovator and he's taken up the chaff tramlining kit, which has been a real big bonus for his weed control without using herbicides in the past few years, but in combination with herbicides, crop competition, row spacing and the chaff tramlining kit, making bigger inroads on Johnson grass and things like Feathertop Rhodes and other weeds that are getting around. So adopt something like Peter's doing, please. Yes, that's exactly right, everybody. Adopt something like Peter Bache is doing. Peter Bache took the bit between his teeth well and truly and adopted that chaff tramlining. I think one of the harvest weed seed control methods that we talk about, or that I talk about. And of course, that last photo, that still photo of that paddock was that was Johnson grass. That's how much Johnson grass he could have respread across his paddock if he didn't have a chaff tramlining kit on the back of his header. So all that Johnson grass in that wheel track is going to be a whole lot easier and a whole lot better to control than spread all that over the countryside in his next crop. Might have the next video, please, Lisa. Good afternoon, Jason. Good afternoon, everybody. Paul McIntosh here with another update on weed control in our northern region. I'm here this afternoon with Jason Roger from
Moree.
From Moree. Welcome to the video, Jason. Jason, I know you've spoke at WeedSmart. We've had WeedSmart weeks before for the cause of weed control in the eastern part of Australia. What problems have you been experiencing with your weeds over the last couple of years?
Probably the biggest problems those escapes in the summer with our summer fallows. We're predominantly winter cropping, so it's our summer fallows where we're having the most problems. And I guess grasses are probably our main. Feathertop Rhodes grass and barnyard grass. I guess we just got such small windows there sometimes for control, and so we're they're our biggest problems.
How have you been controlling them in the past? Just big doses of Roundup, or you use residuals, or both?
Both. We have been using a lot of residuals in the last 5 to 7 years, perhaps. It does take a bit of planning to fit into the rotations, and we can come unstuck. We have had that happen, and so residuals and then our knockdowns and I guess we're trying to make sure we get in there early and try and control these weeds while they're small and fresh. And
the weed, it's been a popular thing, that green on brown. The weed is just one type of them, but the green on brown, are you using it, that sort of stuff too?
Haven't been yet. We're always thinking about it. I guess, we haven't yet. I guess things are just moving so fast. We're sort of starting to think, okay, do we hold off? Just maybe look at green on green, or I guess just trying not to get caught behind the 8 ball. But so we're just closely watching that green on green.
Say nothing about the cost of those green on browns when there's something else coming behind. You don't want to commit yourself to that type of technology when there's something green on green, which is quite remarkable in my estimation.
Yeah.
Jason, so you're on your weeds early, which is great. You're mixing and rotating your herbicides and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. What other cultural controls are you doing for weed control besides using your herbicides, both knockdown and residual?
Look, any of those escapes or hard to kill weeds, we are going through and marking those weeds the best. We might be sitting in the spray rig doing a blanket spray, and then we come across those hard to control weeds. We will mark them on mapping software, and then synchronise that software to other users, and that they can then go through with side by sides and chipping hose, the good old chipping hoe to go back in and and control them that way, because quite often they're just isolated plants sitting there all by themselves. And so rather than pulling up the spray rig every 500 metres to get them, we're just marking them as we go through and then coming straight back in and chipping them out that way. And or we, if there's bigger patches of grasses, we've got little, might be a 12 plate offset disc there, just a little 3-point linkage rig that we just put on the small tractor, and we just run around with it and just strategically cultivate those small areas.
So that strategic tillage or reset part of that, the paddock with the little 12 disc, that's very, very handy. The personal commitment, isn't it, for this weed control, of stopping them from going to seed and setting seed, and you get them and you control them, you kill them, you dig them out, you bury them before they actually set seed. And that's a huge commitment can keep the weeds under your control on your farm, apart from just using our herbicides. Jason, is there anything else you'd like to add with your weed control?
No, I think that's we do find if we can just get onto those weeds while they're small. Look, we might end up doing an extra 1, maybe 2 fallow sprays a year, because we are going in early, and then perhaps we're missing some, but we are finding we get a lot better weed control while weeds are small and fresh.
This is the first day of July, and of course I'm down here from southern Queensland, and the northern New South Wales crops, I can assure you, look absolutely beautiful. So when this video comes on, let's hope they're still beautiful with a couple of inches of rain. But the crops look first class around here, Jason, so congratulations.
Thanks,
there's plenty of competition, everybody. They look good and well and healthy, and if any weed wants to grow on Jason's crops, they're going to have a bit of a struggle with the crop competition angle too.
Well, that is something we are noticing this year with the big canopies. We are there is a lot of suppression there of those weeds underneath. They're just not able to get going. So that's certainly helping a lot this year.
Good part of WeedSmart. Thank you very much, Jason, for your time, and all the best for the rest of the season.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks.
Yeah, once again, one of the WeedSmart Big Six comes up is the crop competition and row spacing. And of course, the thing that really appealed to me there with Jason's talk, everybody, is the chip hoe. Because as everyone knows, when you read my LinkedIn bit, my 7th birthday present from my father was a chipping hoe, and away I went chipping weeds out all around the farm in the South Burnett. And so Jason's doing it a little bit easier with a pin drop as he's going through in the spray machine. And of course, everywhere down that country had a bit of Feathertop, Rhodes and other pesky weeds to get rid of. So well done, Jason, and a personal commitment to get someone to chip the weeds out if they can't be sprayed out. Next one, thanks, Liesl. Philip Coggan of Ingleston, south of Mandara. Philip, you've been here for a fair while in the family property. What weeds have been the major ones from the last few years here on the property?
The main problem weed has been Feathertop Rhodes grass, and then Fleabane. Another one is vetch, which is a problem child growing chickpeas, and that's magnified the problem.
You got any barnyard grass issues as well?
Yeah, barnyard, and also what you said, Euroclara as well. Yeah.
Do you suspect them they've been glyphosate resistant, those weeds?
Definitely.
The whole lot, or just some of them, do you think?
I think the whole lot. Yeah.
So what method are you using to get over those glyphosate resistant weeds that you believe you've got?
Oh, there's a couple of things we're doing. Is deep ripping with a horse tiger. That's inverting some of the weed seeds.
It's burying them down deeper.
Yeah, burying them deeper.
Yep.
And then we also camera spray them as well, and takes them out. And all the other alternative we've been using is cultivation. And then also we're planting crops in narrow rows instead of metre rows. We're going back to 12-inch rows or 13-inch rows.
Which crops are they for, Philip, those narrow rows?
All crops.
All crops.
Yeah. Chickpeas, barley, forest or lab, whatever. Yeah.
Okay. Any other things you're doing with your weed control besides those ones you mentioned?
Heavier planting rates.
Crop competition part of it.
So crop competition as well.
So you're narrowing your row spacing, but you're also putting more seeds in per square metre.
That's correct.
So what are you up to with the chickpeas? Chickpeas per square metre, how many seeds are you putting in there?
We're planning around about 70 kilos.
70 kilos to the hectare.
That was Philip Coggan, everybody, from out at Ingliston, south of Meandara on the Western Downs. Philip's part of a family operation that is a fairly big one, and it's been there for quite a while, and he's got plenty of trouble with weeds, as everybody has in the Western Downs, and he's doing a myriad of things to get over it. And you heard some of the ones there with the narrow row spacings and the increasing the number of plants or seeds per square metre. So well done, Philip. He's getting there, and he's been even getting some pretty good weed control with his chickpeas and getting over them with narrow rows too, as a few people have out there. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. Thanks, Liesl.
So, Rob, you do a lot of crop sequencing or crop rotations. Can you tell me what you exactly do then in this part of the world?
Yeah, the farmers need to think about the sequence of crops that they grow for their profitability, and that sequence of crops that they grow through their rotation, and then look at where there's an opportunity in that sequence to apply some sort of weed control, whether it's a residual herbicide or it's some other tactic that that's available that they can use, and exploit every opportunity there is to manage weeds.
You were telling me about the atrazine story, putting on atrazine in front of planting, Rob, and then following up later on mature and stuff.
Yep.
Like, that's a commonplace for your clients, what you deal with? And they're
quite common using residual herbicides at sowing or even after harvest of crops, leading up into a fallow to come into a fallow clean. With different crops in a rotation, that allows you to rotate your herbicides as well. So you'll have a mixture of herbicides throughout the paddock in time. So in one particular year, you're not following the same herbicides year after year after year. You're just rotating them around, and that should give us a lot more years worth of time to manage our resistance.
So rotation of herbicides is a key part, and that falls in with the rotation.
Yep. Mixed rotation allows you to use a mixed set of herbicides that are in a sequence that doesn't hurt the following crop, or it maximises the yield of that particular crop, which then helps with productivity on the farm, manages weeds at the same time, and the next tip will be having that zero weed seed set somewhere, picking up those final few that are out there. That's
stopping the seed set is a key part of it, isn't it? Like, whatever you got to do about that stuff. What's your key weeds down here, Rob, that you're struggling with? Not struggling with, but you're dealing with?
Dealing with boneyard grass, Feathertop Rhodes grass, Fleabane, milk thistle.
What about winter time?
Winter time, milk thistle, Fleabane.
Black oats?
Yeah, we do have black oats.
Yeah. And what about ryegrass?
And there are some small pockets of ryegrass.
Do you worry about that ryegrass and black oats getting a bit more of a go in their winter cropping situation with emphasis on chickpeas, or do you control them well enough in your chickpea crops?
Yes, I do worry about black oats and a fair few chickpeas and the group A resistance in black oats. However, you do have opportunities in the other crops to use other herbicides to control black oats, and not only do you have herbicides, but you also got crop competition as well. So barley is very good at shaking out winter weeds, grass weeds, and you have Group B herbicides in wheat and barley that you can use to manage your black oats, and that's where they should be used. You don't have any Group B options in chickpeas, but you do in wheat. So
when we talk about crop competition, are you talking about row spacing, or do you talk about plant numbers per square metre, or both?
I think it's everything. It's the crop type, the row spacing, the plant numbers, the gaps, evenness of emergence, time of sowing, the whole thing.
The whole thing gives you better weed control of you.
Yep, and when the crops grow in relation to when the weeds grow, so you might be able to get your barley growing a bit earlier than some of the wheat, or closing the rows a bit earlier than the wheat, a bit quicker.
Where do you see some of the mechanical things like harvest weed seed control methods in the future for weed control down here, destroying the seeds?
I think it's got a lot of fit. We'll end up spreading the chaff everywhere if they can, or that they had the harvest weed seed smashing, and then the destruction, and then spreading it across the paddock and they're all destroyed, then
They're all
there's
destroyed,
no
that's
problem.
right. With the harvest weed seed control, only the chaff fraction comes out in the wheel track, and then the rest of the chaff is still, the rest of the stalks are spread out sort of stuff. So that's something I think is going to be something for the future. And I've been looking at it for some time. I'm in this job for 4 or 5 years now, and I've been looking at it. I thought, I'm not going to burn the paddock because I got my ass kicked when I was a young fella to burn the paddock, so that's not going to work. The Harrington seed structures are a lot of money, and that costs a lot to put on, sort of stuff. The old chaff tramline, you can make your own, just to put the chaff fraction in the wheel trucks, and then presto, you've got something. You're doing something besides herbicide to get rid of weeds. That's the way I see it.
Sorry.
I can't wait to prove you wrong. Thanks, Rob.
No worries.
Rob and I had a great chat there, and there was a little bit of backwards and forwards talk there, everybody, but it's a good way to be with having a talk about weeds, isn't it? You exchange ideas, exchange what you can do and what you can't do, what's successful and what's working well, and then you adopt it. And of course, the big six, the WeedSmart big six that we're trying to adopt up here, or are adopting up here, is definitely going to get us a lot further down the track than just relying on herbicides all the time, sort of stuff. So to maintain our herbicides, we need to look at all methods of weed control. So apologies for the bit of banter between Rob and I, but he's a key person down in that Moree growing area, and I thank him very much for his candid comments and our great chat. I see on the screen here the WeedSmart people that I'm part of from Western Australia. You can see that our sponsors are there too, our partners, very integrated part of our WeedSmart. And of course, you can see that the chemical companies are there. And we're talking about, mix and rotating, double knocking, harvest weed seed control, stopping seed set, 2 + 2 = 0 survivors and all that stuff. We're all there to preserve what we can do for our farming operations in the future, not just with herbicides, but all the other methods we need to adopt to get over the problem of weeds and herbicide-resistant weeds. We'll go on to the next one. Thanks, Sowthistle.
Welcome, viewers.
Hello there.
Tony Lockery from Moree, joining Darryl Bartlett on his beautiful farm that's got green in the background. You can see it today.
Welcome to Koori Plains.
Just having a bit of a yarn about weed control tactics on this farm. One of our best operators in terms of what we're doing with herbicides and how we're doing it with rotating modes of action, using different tactics, timings, residuals, etc. But what we wanted to tease out a little bit more today was what we're doing that's not coming out of a drum. So what non-herbicide tactics are we talking about and using on farm in this operation across 4 farms actually. We've talked a little bit about crop competition, baling, grazing. Let's expand on that a bit, Darryl. What have we done here in the last couple of years and to take the pressure off our herbicides?
Yeah, well, the last couple of years have been dry, but we did have opportunity where we had enough feed to justify cattle on a couple of blocks. So if there was any black oats that, got germinated, then we didn't have to worry about that seed set. And then with the making the hay, again, fortunate enough. And then this year, though, with the outlook of a good year promised by the BOM, we thought we should up our sowing rates and make sure we had adequate fertilizer to support that, but also go early so that we had as best crop competition for weeds as we could.
Yep.
And then as soon as the weeds presented themselves, we jumped all over it and got our chemistry in, but got them small so that we, didn't have so much faith on the chemical. We didn't need to.
And this year we had a rain, which we didn't have last year or the year before, but the rain event we had in March brought the first flush of those winter weeds up. So we got to control them effectively with different modes of action before we got the crop in. And then the crop got up and away really well. There's some work that Darryl's done here with row width variation. So we've got a 10-inch and a 15-inch to look at. And then we've also got some seeding rate differences. So you've gone up a little bit, 5–10%.
We've gone up to as high as 75. Then we just gone with the stock standard on this one paddock at 50. And then we've dropped that to 35. And look, at harvest, we'll measure how the crop competition went. And yield, of course.
And yield.
Yep.
Yep. Nice. And in the barley here that we're looking at, it's gone in at 70 kilos. Again, as you said, with good nutrition, a good moisture outlook. And it's pretty hard to see the ground here, so there's no daylight getting through to those little weeds at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, we did go through 2 weeks ago and tap them on the head, so that, yeah, there was still a bit of open canopy then, but now, like you say, yeah, we've closed it up pretty hard.
How do you find getting herbicide when you do go across those tighter canopies? How do you go getting herbicide in? What are you using there to monitor, and how are you applying herbicide in that sense?
Yeah, we had a look at a couple of different nozzles to see how well we could get the chemical to get into the canopy, and then we got some water sensitive paper as well, put it in different areas, and so I'd put it up against the bottom of the plant line and have an assessment. Yeah, that looks like pretty good coverage, and if I were a little weed the size of your fingernail, then I got you. And then also if it's a fungicide and whatnot. So, you know, we ended up with a coarse medium droplet going slower so that the twin fan had the capacity to come in at 2 different angles.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the water sensitive paper came up really well. That was a great setup with the twin jets. Some of the other things that you are doing from a herbicide point of view, though, we've become a lot more efficient in the fallow well before I came on board here with the acquisition of a camera spray. Tell us a bit about that one.
Well, 7 years ago, I had an area in a paddock that we knew it was resistant barnyard grass to Roundup. And we hit it 5 different ways. So it wasn't a double knock, it was a quintuple knock, and we still had survivors, and it really got me. Went to a field day, saw the optical camera working. I said, I like the look of this, let's get it, and just make sure it works. And that paddock this year, there is still the odd weed, but we've gone from 100% coverage on 30% of the paddock to maybe 5 to 8% coverage on the whole paddock. So we've greatly reduced our chemistry, but in saying that, the weed seed set, we've really got on top of that. And like you said earlier, we rotate our herbicide groups. So we might come in with a decent Roundup rate right after harvest as a blanket. And then we just, focus on, our paraquats and residuals, like your balances and whatnot, try to get them in place. And then with the camera, anytime there's a little outbreak, so the trigger is, as soon as that first weed, and it doesn't matter what weed species it is, as soon as it looks like it's going to start popping a seed head, you get out there and you control it. So that, it just doesn't matter. You just pick the chemistry that's going to help.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So we're also using that for the double knock with the paraquat, with or without a group G. So there's quite a few different groups being employed there, and in what we're doing.
Yeah.
Go.
I was just going to say, and then we did trials years ago with deep placement P. We got some really good results. So the year I started using that strategy, I thought, well, I might as well put the nitrogen down with it. I might as well rip it in real deep and hard. I'll try to eliminate some of my tram lines and just try to even out the paddock, but also there was opportunity to, again, eliminate weed seeds by not only killing the plant outright, but actually burying those weed seeds at a depth that you knew they weren't going to come back to haunt you.
So that opportunity to do a 3 or 4 in one job, take out any existing fleabane or grass or whatever it was that that was in the paddock at the same time. So a little bit of the old Group S.
Yep.
And the other one that Daryl uses really well is Group F. And that's, I don't know if you'll get that on camera, but that's this one, F for foot. Spends a lot of time walking and looking in paddocks, and that's critical for not just looking at where the problems are and what to hit them with, but once you've implemented a strategy, coming back and seeing whether it's been successful or not. So just making sure we're going back over things, and all the staff on the farm have got the same mindset. We're back across paddocks and checking to see how good a job that's been done and making sure there's no escapes.
Yeah, I always ask the question, why is that doing what it's doing? And it doesn't matter if it's crop growth or if it's that weed that still got a bit of green on it, because that might be the next weed that has that new mode of resistance that you need to either just chip it out or work out another system to control it.
Yeah, well said, Daryl and Tony Lockery. Some good points in there, isn't there? Group F from Lockers about the footprints, and of course one of the best things is the best fertiliser in a paddock is the farmer and the agro's footsteps. Well, maybe the best weed control in a paddock is the farmer and the agro's footsteps, checking that spray applications have worked properly, and we have that zero seed set in that 2 + 2 = 0 that the cotton industry has so muchly adopted too. So thanks very much to Lockers and Daryl. You're a lot of these takes, people they're just first uppers. This taking stuff out, but they're all very natural, all the guys, and they're part of our farming group and our agronomy group, so they're all doing very well. We might go to the last one. Thank you, Liesl.
Paul McIntosh from WeedSmart here in near Warriella, and with me is Paul Nelson from Tags at Cropper Creek. Paul, we're in a great crop of barley here, but I remember some years ago when I was here with you and it was covered in all sorts of weeds. Do you want to give us a description of what the paddock was like when we were here some years ago?
Yeah, sure, thanks Macca. Started coming out here back in 2012. In the 2013 season we had an issue with the place. The farmer had just taken it over, and chock-a-block full of ryegrass, and Group A resistant ryegrass. Had any amounts of axial thrown at it over the years prior to that topic, and just not even affecting it. The farmer had an issue where the ryegrass in the main, certainly around the outsides, sort of 200 metres into the crop, was out-competing anything that you wanted to grow, and it was just wall-to-wall ryegrass. Fortunately, the grower also has quite a major cattle operation and does use a lot of hay, so we went into the process of harvesting the ryegrass rather than trying to kill it with chemicals, harvesting the ryegrass and turning it into silage hay with the oats or barley that it was planted with prior to that seed becoming viable. So in the first season we silaged the whole paddock. We didn't keep any for grain, we just took it all off, total crop removal. Then the advent of scope barley, an IMI-tolerant barley variety, was there for us to use. So we went with that and we used 200 mils of Flame or Mazapic in conjunction with planting that barley. That immediately started to reduce the numbers, but still the population was that strong, and certainly out towards the edges it wasn't getting it all. So we went into a 3-season plan of baling the outsides of the paddocks and any of the severe ryegrass areas still. So every year we cut it before it went to seed. We did 2 seasons of using the IMIs, using Flame in crop, and then waited a year, used 242 and Glean to try and keep our milk thistles under control. Still baling certain areas, so we baled for about 3 seasons, maybe into the 4th season as a just rule of thumb. Since then, we now go into Spartacus barley, which I believe is a better variety for this area for grain production. We still use Flame, IMI technology at least, 2 seasons out of 3, and in the 3rd season we go back into a toward-on basis. And what it's done is turned this paddock into, you're flat out finding a ryegrass now. We've got a little bit still around the fences, so we haven't used any Group A herbicides here to try and control ryegrass. We have for black oats and phalaris. Certainly this year we've put one over, and the job's magnificent. Starting to see a bit of milk thistle creep back in. We want to avoid glyphosate resistance with that one. We're getting a bit of Feathertop Rhodes start to happen, so we'll change our plan again. But the hay production, crop removal, seed removal before it becomes viable has been a far better tool than any chemistry. And this crop, well, potential at the moment is heaven knows what. It's glorious. And we've had 450 mils of rain for the season, but it was coming out of one of the worst droughts that we've ever seen, with less than 250 mils in the previous 12 months. But our stubbles have been retained and everything looks good.
Paul, I don't think there's much more for me to say, everybody, but you've heard it here, what we can do with other tools besides using herbicides.
Yeah, back again. Yeah, that's exactly right. Not much more for me to say, everybody, about Paul Nelson, Nello's thing. The interesting part is Nello did work experience with me many years ago, and I'm so proud of what he's doing around the ridges, and I'm proud of everyone, the way they're adopting the WeedSmart Big Six up here in the northern region. We might have started behind the 8 ball because we have winter and summer cropping and think we can get over with herbicides, but we really need to adopt more parts of the WeedSmart Big Six, everybody. So back to you, Ben.
Thanks, Paul. Running a little bit over time, but we do have time for a few questions if anyone has any. We might just follow up on one we put to Chris earlier on. To you, Paul, was Picloram residual activity on Feathertop Rhodes. Yeah, can we expect to see any, and how reliable will it be?
I'd say bugger all, Ben, to be really honest. I know we can get it at Sowthistle, but I've never seen any visible evidence in a paddock, unless someone wants to ring up and tell me I'm wrong, but I've never seen any Picloram residual or activity on Feathertop Rhodes. Fleabane, yes. Sowthistle, yes. Buckwheat, wireweed, all those sort of things, yes, but not Feathertop Rhodes.
Sure. Just moving on to the Big Six, the crop competition and narrow row spacing. I know a lot of people are sort of nervous about that as far as screenings and, you know, these dry hot finishes that we get go. Are you seeing, you know, many people adopt that, or are they just trying to increase their planting rate?
Oh, a bit of both, Ben. No, they're not too worried about the screenings. They're more worried about the weeds, to be really honest. And they are bringing in the row spacings quite a bit, like Philip Coggan is, and we're really dragging him back in. Of course, you've got to remember why we put the doggone row spacings out there years ago, particularly in pulse crops and stuff like that, to try and get a bit of height into the thing so we can get the header underneath them. But these days, the desire is the weed control, so we're bringing them back in. And no, I've never seen too much evidence of that. The screenings can be for other reasons, not just bringing in your row spacings, Ben.
Sure. I think that might cover us for the questions at the moment. So in the interest of time, we might leave it there. If there's any other questions, we can certainly pass them on to Chris and Paul to answer down the track. Yeah, so I'd really like to thank both speakers, Dr. Chris Preston and Paul McIntosh, and also WeedSmart for all their work in this space as well. Yeah. So we'd just like to put a reminder out that, register for our remaining webinars at cropconsultants.com.au/events. And just, this webinar has been recorded and will be uploaded to the website and will be available in upcoming CCA e-newsletters. And another reminder, there's another webinar tomorrow catching up from a postponement in June, Advanced Pulse Physiology, what you should not have forgotten since uni. Probably plenty for you and me, Paul, but anyway, it should be interesting. And this will actually be chaired by Paul McIntosh and featured Dr. Marissa Collins. So everyone will be lucky they get 2 nights in a row with Paul.
You're lucky, very lucky.
Okay, so thank you everyone for joining this webinar. You should receive a short online survey soon. It'd be very much appreciated if you can complete that. And that's it. So thanks again, Chris, Paul. Have a good night.